If you're watching this video, you're probably considering replatforming your e-commerce store and trying to decide what platform to go to, what the right platform is. Because moving an entire e-commerce business is hard, it's risky, it takes time, it takes effort, and it's costly. And you need the right team to do it, one that has a lot of experience. And so if you're going to move, you really want to do it for the right reasons. And you want the upside to significantly overcome the cost of moving. And so today, we're going to break down the pros and cons of two of the main platforms, or two of the popular platforms that many people consider for their e-commerce business. Hey guys, welcome to Metacake, where we break down the principles behind creating a highly successful e-commerce business. And my name is Kenneth Ott. And look, we've replatformed hundreds of 8- and 9-figure e-commerce businesses. We've designed hundreds of customer journeys and stores and online experiences. We've advised almost 1,000 e-commerce businesses on how to grow business, how to grow their actual business. And so we have a lot of experience with the reasons why you would use any particular platform. You know, there are a bunch of platforms, and the fact is that they have pros and cons. They're different tools in the tool belt. And so depending on what you want to do, you need to choose the right tool. And so now the reality is that right now, if you have or want to have a serious e-commerce channel, right? Like the channel of your business that's driving your revenue, if that's serious, right, and that's an e-commerce business, you're only going to look at a handful of platforms. You're not going to be looking at platforms like Wix or Squarespace or GoDaddy. Those are just simply not for serious businesses, or at least not for serious e-commerce businesses. And they may be fine for things like side hustles or selling t-shirts, although I'd argue that they're even fine for that. And so if you're really serious and you have a serious e-commerce channel, then there's kind of a spectrum of what I would call professional commerce platforms. And it used to be that you had to build your own platform from scratch and host your own platform. And now, in this day and age, generally speaking, that's not something that 99% of companies do or should do. Very few do, and for probably very specific reasons. And so beyond that kind of like beginner tier, the sort of entry to professional level e-commerce platforms are platforms like WooCommerce and Shopify and BigCommerce. And now notice that I specifically mentioned Shopify and not Shopify Plus, and BigCommerce and not BigCommerce Enterprise. The kind of entry level tier of these platforms is very different than professional level tier of these platforms. And so at the entry level of like kind of professional commerce platforms, you have those types of platforms. You have things like WooCommerce, Shopify, and BigCommerce. And now then you get into like things like the pro tier. Like the pro tier are platforms like the Shopify Plus platform. Right? This is where most serious e-commerce businesses are probably looking in this pro tier. Some people call it the enterprise tier, but I think sometimes that says a little bit something that doesn't relate to some businesses. Whether you're an enterprise, whether you have a highly successful e-commerce business, you want to probably be in this tier. And this is where most people are. So this is like Shopify Plus and BigCommerce Enterprise and platforms like Magento, which is actually now called Adobe Commerce, right? Although kind of like Twitter, everyone still refers to it as Magento. But those are the types of platforms that you're probably looking at. And then lastly, I call it the specialty tier, right? And when you get into the specialty tier of platforms, the truth is you're not going to be looking at these, or you shouldn't be looking at these, unless it's very specific to your business. Like unless they fulfill a very specific need that nothing else does, right? And so these platforms are not based on your scale or your revenue, because you could be doing billions of dollars on Shopify Plus or Magento or Adobe Cloud, Commerce Cloud, and be fine. So it has nothing to do with scale or has revenue. It has everything to do with specialty, right? And so some of the platforms in this specialty tier are platforms like Salesforce Commerce Cloud and platforms like SAP Hybris. And so we've actually written and done videos on all these platforms. So if you're looking for reviews specifically on one of those platforms, we can link to those in the description. But for the sake of this conversation, you're probably looking at WooCommerce or Magento. Maybe you're moving from WooCommerce to Magento or looking at moving from WooCommerce to Magento, also known as Adobe Commerce. And so what we're going to go through are what are the core differences, what are the pros and cons of these two platforms. And in looking at these differences, hopefully it helps you make a decision as to which one is right for you, or if you're moving from WooCommerce to Magento, if that's the right move for you, right? And so hopefully this helps you here. So number one, WooCommerce is open source by nature, right? So you can download it, you can modify the code, you can do all those kind of things. Adobe Commerce Cloud is closed source. You can certainly extend it, but you cannot modify its core. Like that is not what it's intended for, right? And if you do that, you're probably really going to affect the stability of what you're building, right? So if this is important to you, then great. It's not necessarily important to everybody, but it is a point. The next thing is around licensing. And so WooCommerce is essentially free and low-cost licenses. Like it's got license fees, but nothing compared to Magento or Adobe Commerce, right? So free/low cost on the licensing front. Adobe Commerce, you're dealing with year-long contracts with Adobe and much higher licensing fees. So it's a different echelon completely when it comes to cost of licensing and just, some hard overall costs, like completely different. Next thing is around hosting, right? And so both WooCommerce and Adobe Commerce, you have to host yourself. And by host yourself, you could certainly find, I'm not saying you host it in your basement, I certainly wouldn't do that. You find someone, a specialty hosting company that hosts WooCommerce or hosts Adobe Commerce. But here's the thing, when you're self-hosting, which both of these platforms you will be, there are challenges with that. It's pretty costly. You need very specialized people to make sure that it doesn't go down. And then it does go down sometimes, right? Like this infrastructure is one that needs to be maintained, and it's not going to be, I don't care what anyone says, I've worked with many of these brands, it's not as stable as something like a hosted platform. And so, that's one of the trade-offs. One of the benefits is you can do a lot with it, you can do whatever you want, but it's both these platforms can be self-hosted. When it comes to customizing and building, both WooCommerce and Adobe Commerce, you can really build whatever you want. That is really the great benefit to choosing one of these platforms, or specifically if you're in an e-commerce primary business, choosing Adobe Commerce or Magento, because you can build whatever you want. Now that comes with a trade-off. It's a little more costly. You have to host it yourself. There's other things that you have to consider. You can build whatever you want on both these platforms. So next comes to stability. WooCommerce is going to be less stable. WooCommerce is not going to want you to hear this and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of WooCommerce fans out there, and it's great. It's cool for some things, but it's certainly less stable because of the infrastructure you have to create, because of the fact that it's open source and the fact that it has many plugins. It's got vulnerabilities that come out more often. And so you're going to be dealing with stability issues generally more than you would with Magento or Adobe Commerce. And so Adobe Commerce is going to be more stable, not completely stable, but more stable than WooCommerce, less stable than Shopify Plus, if that makes sense. So that's kind of like where it sits, because you have to maintain your own infrastructure, right? There are plugins, but there's a more limited plugin ecosystem than WooCommerce. And so security is still a concern, but it's generally a little less of a concern. And so that's on stability. The next is CMS, right? And so how you use this. And so when it comes to WooCommerce is based on WordPress. WordPress is a well-known CMS. Like most people know how to use a WordPress site, but it is not an e-commerce CMS. And so I'll get into this a little bit later, but if your business is only doing e-commerce, then WooCommerce is going to be clunkier. Like the WooCommerce is a plugin for WordPress. And so, and when it comes to products are, WordPress was built as a publishing platform. And so products are going to be kind of shoehorned in. And again, this is maybe feeling like I'm painting WordPress in a bad picture. It's really not. It's just not a commerce first platform. So it's going to be a little bit clunkier to use. Adobe Commerce is based on a commerce CMS. It was built from the ground up as an e-commerce platform. And so it's built for e-commerce. And if you're a full-time e-commerce company and you have a team that helps manage, orders and those kind of things, like, publishing products and marketing, etc., it's going to have the tools tools to allow you to leverage that and allow that team to do their job in a better way than WooCommerce will. So it's better for enterprises, it's better for large organizations, it's better for full-time e-commerce businesses than WooCommerce. And so that's on the CMS side. And so kind of keying off of that, it's better, WooCommerce is better for smaller teams and businesses where e-commerce is kind of like a bolt-on to their business, or you're just starting out with e-commerce. But I would argue that WooCommerce would not be a good choice for starting out with e-commerce. But it's better for smaller teams, better if e-commerce is a little bit more of an addition to your business, and maybe your core business is around content or publishing or something else like that. Adobe Commerce is better for enterprises and larger organizations with sophisticated management capabilities that helps bigger teams and businesses where e-commerce is truly the core of their business. That's kind of how teams would use these two. Let's get into flexibility. WordPress and WooCommerce are going to be much more flexible with all the plugins and the themes than Adobe Commerce. It's going to be easier to get your site up and running fast and looking decent with stuff that's out there, right? And you're going to be able to find developers that know WordPress and they're going to say they can do stuff and they'll do stuff and it'll be cool. But here's the problem. It also becomes more vulnerable because it is easier and it is more flexible, and there are more people that, say that they can do these things. And by the way, when you hire someone, there's a spectrum, right? They're not all the same. So you can hire someone that says they can do stuff and they might be down here on the level, not very, very good. And then you might have someone that's very, very good. Point is like WordPress has a much greater spectrum, right? And if you go on Fiverr to hire someone to work on your WooCommerce store, I would say maybe don't expect it to stay up very long or all the time. That's the kind of deal. Like, it's more flexible, but also a little more vulnerable. Adobe Commerce is more restrictive with what you can do. It is harder to do things. That can be a challenge, right? It can actually feel like you can't move as fast. It's going to be more costly, but it's going to be a little more stable as well because of those same reasons, right? So it's going to be a little harder. You're going to have to build a lot of things from scratch. Themes are not going to look as good out of the box. You're going to have to work harder to make them look and function well. In fact, some of them just plain look bad and function poorly out of the box, and you have to build a lot of things. Plugins are less current, and especially marketing plugins, you have to be building a lot of things that you want, right? So it might be slower to adapt and harder to be agile on Adobe Commerce, but that comes with a little bit greater stability. Depending on what your goal is, sometimes that's good. If your business is relying on your e-commerce channel and it's doing significant revenue, then stability is very important. And so that's important. When it comes to cost, WooCommerce is going to be less costly at the beginning. The truth is, if you want to compare apples to apples, like get it to the same stability and the same quality of people working on it, which you would want if it's a serious thing, you're probably going to be about the same in cost. And I'll get into like cost estimates of what we see at these two platforms costing in a little bit here later. Both WooCommerce and Adobe Commerce are poor from an analytics standpoint. And so when you have an e-commerce business or any business, you need data to make good decisions, accurate decisions, wise decisions. And the truth is that both of these out of the box are very poor on the analytics side. Don't care what anyone says, like that is one place that they fall short. And I help guide hundreds of $50, $100 million stores. And that's really important, because when you're doing revenue at those levels, and even if you're earlier, like you need to have the ability to instantly get the data that you need. You need certain KPIs and you need to not have certain KPIs, and it needs to be accurate so that you can steer the ship. And so you're gonna have to do more work on the analytics side. You're gonna have to get more third-party tools to help get accurate and good data for the KPIs that you need to actually grow the business on both WooCommerce and Adobe Commerce. Let's get into publishing. If content publishing is at the core of your business, then WooCommerce, because it's based on WordPress, is a better choice, right? If that's the core of your business. If content is not, right, then Adobe Commerce is probably a better choice for your business. It's a commerce first platform. As I mentioned, content is an afterthought. It doesn't do content very well. That's something to consider if you're looking at Magento or Adobe Commerce. And then lastly, WooCommerce, because it's on WordPress, probably has people that are more familiar with it, more people that are more familiar with it. But the commerce features, I would say, are hard to use if you don't know it. Like there's still a learning curve there. With Adobe Commerce, there's certainly a steep learning curve. It's not easy to use, and the UI is kind of clunky, and you really have to know what you're doing, and you can actually really mess things up pretty badly in either one of these platforms. right? If you have the right capabilities, you can just go in and totally destroy a store pretty easily, even accidentally, if you don't know what you're doing and you've got too much access. So something to be aware of. It's something to be really cautious of with your team or with someone that's working on these things. Let's talk about cost a little bit. The cost differences to get these things up and running, these two platforms, and what it looks like to scale them. And so when it comes to cost, WooCommerce may seem less costly and certainly is to start, right? And that may be why you started with WooCommerce, because of the cost. That's probably why most people do. And then they look at migrating off once they grow past a certain point. But the truth is that if you were to line these both up and get both platforms to a stable scenario, and both platforms have great people working on them that are skilled, that can actually help your business and make sure that it stays stable. Once you create that same team and infrastructure, they're both going to be about the same. The way I look at it is either one of these, like if you're building them in the way to sustain a running e-commerce business that's serious with momentum, you're going to be looking at $300,000 to $600,000 in developing the platforms, developing the platforms, and then ongoing costs are going to probably be at least on that order, right, on a yearly basis. And so that's kind of the cost that you need to be looking at. Like that includes license fees and infrastructure costs and design costs and engineering costs and all these different things. Like it's a generalization, but that's generally what I see. If you want to build on these platforms, you're generally gonna be looking at a budget of $300,000 to $600,000 to do them well. And then probably approximately that same budget, maybe even more, depending on what you do, on an ongoing basis to keep them stable, consistent, and growing, right? Along with all the activities you do in marketing, etc. With WooCommerce, the only advantage is that if you wanted to spend less at the beginning, you could. There's a lower entry point for WooCommerce. It's open source. You can hire freelancers, but at the end of the day, you're sacrificing stability. So if your business doesn't need that, and it may not when you're starting out, then maybe that's a good option for you. But you can definitely, it's a lower entry level, but I don't see a lot of benefit in that if you're really planning on this being a serious thing. There are probably better options for your entry point, other platforms that are better for your entry point if this is a serious e-commerce business. And so if you're an e-commerce first business, which platform should you choose, right? And so if you're serious and are planning or currently doing or planning to do revenue $2 million plus, which many are doing way more than that, but at the minimum, that $2 million plus revenue mark, you need to be looking at a professional commerce platform, at least in our opinion, my opinion, how I would advise. And that's of these two, that's Adobe Commerce, right? Of WooCommerce and Adobe Commerce / Magento. Adobe Commerce is the professional commerce platform. That's the one I would choose out of these two. If you're less of an e-commerce first business, maybe you're in a content business, maybe you're in a different business that you're kind of bolting on an e-commerce thing, and you're not as concerned about sustainability or just stability, and then WooCommerce is probably okay for you. We've built businesses on both. We've helped businesses migrate from both of these, actually. And typically, our first choice would not be WooCommerce. That's just the truth. Most people are migrating away from WooCommerce onto a pro e-commerce platform. Maybe it's like Adobe Commerce or Shopify Plus or something like that. But the question about Adobe Commerce is, why would you choose it? There are certain scenarios where it makes sense to choose Magento or Adobe Commerce. The main one being that you need to customize certain parts of your commerce experience in a non-traditional way. And that would be a good reason to choose Adobe Commerce over any other platform if you need to do that. But if that's not the case, then you're much better off with a platform like Shopify Plus. And this isn't an ad for Shopify Plus. I don't work for Shopify Plus. It's just that Shopify Plus, after I've been building businesses on various platforms for 15 years, Shopify Plus is the best choice for almost every serious e-commerce business. Unless you have a need to customize the experience in a non-traditional way. If you'd actually like to watch a review on Shopify Plus where we actually dig deeper into that, I will link that for you down below. And I hope this is helpful in guiding you on what platform is the right for the future of your e-commerce channel. We help grow e-commerce businesses and help them make the right decision about platform decisions like this every day. And then we design stores that actually meet their growth needs. And so if you're a 6 to 9 figure e-commerce business and would like to potentially work with us to help you choose the right platform based on your business, you can go to metacake.com to see if we're a fit. Thanks, and never stop growing.